If any of you have been watching the Holzer Files, this is a really interesting show. The concept of the show is that the team, which consists of a medium, a technical person that deals with all the tools and stuff, and the host, Dave Schrader, a good friend of mine, Dave Schrader, who's been a paranormal investigator for many years up in Minneapolis. They work with the daughter of the great Hans Holzer. He is one of the most famous paranormal investigators of all time. And when I was a kid growing up in the 70s, Hans Holzer, I mean, he was the guy. Him and the Warrens, they were it. Those were the paranormal investigators that were working in the United States. And Holzer wrote, I think, more than 100 books and investigated thousands of cases over his career. So the show, the Holzer Files, which is on, I think it's on Travel Channel, what they're doing is Alexandra Holzer, Hans Holzer's daughter, has gone through her father's case files and found the most perplexing ones that he was not able to, solve. And they're reopening up the cases and trying to solve them today. And so this is a case that came up some months ago. I think it was back in the fall. It was one of the first episodes. I saw the commercial for the Holzer Files, and I saw The Devil in Texas. I heard the announcer mention the town of Tyler, Texas, and I recognized the title, The Devil in Texas, and I recognized Tyler, Texas. And I called up Dave Schrader and I said, is this the story of the young man in Tyler, Texas, where they were having the notes fall out of the air? And he said, yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I watched the show, and you can watch it. It's on YouTube. I think you have to pay like $1.99 to watch it. It's pay-per-view, but it's fascinating. I highly recommend it. The story began in 1968, when the family was living in this house that you see on your screen in Tyler, Texas, the town of Tyler, Texas. And the family consisted of the dad, Howard Beard, his wife, who they called Johnny, their son, Andy, and their daughter, Amy. Now, the mother was mentally ill, and she had gone away for about a year to live with her sister in another town. And so at the time, and I want to say the daughter was maybe away at school, because she wasn't really involved in all of this. It was the dad and the son, Andy, Howard and Andy. And the mother was gone for most of it. She had left almost immediately after it began, and she was unaware that any of it was going on. The connection to Holzer began a couple of years later, when the father, Howard Beard, wrote a letter to Hans Holzer. It was a long letter describing all of the details of what had happened to them in the house. And it was after that he came out to investigate. What had happened, it all started with, I think they were redoing the Andy's bedroom, like doing some remodeling or something. And so the mother was away at her sister's house, and the father and the son were sleeping together in the big bed in the master bedroom. And it was one night they turned out the lights, and immediately after they turned out the lights, they were pelted with all of these objects. And they turned on the lights, and they found that the room was covered, in the bed and the floors were covered with these bugs. They're all dead. These dead bugs, hundreds of them, hundreds of dead bugs that they couldn't even identify what they were. They decided they didn't know what it was. There was no windows open. It was winter. They didn't know what was going on. They decided to just go back to sleep and clean it up the next day. But as soon as they turned off the lights again, they were pelted with all these bugs again. And they turned the lights back on, and there were hundreds more bugs all over the floor. So they went back to sleep with the lights on, and it happened night after night after night. No matter how many times they would clean up, how carefully they would clean up, it would happen again. Other things began to happen, like they would start to hear the knockings and the scratchings and things like that again, and they would find doors open and cabinets open and things like that. The hallmark of this case was that after several weeks of these strange events going on, letters began to drop out of the air in the house. And at first the letters were written in code, the strange code where there was like a letter, a number assigned to each letter of the alphabet. And the family, the father and son had to decode these letters. And the letters in the beginning seemed to be from the mother, the mentally ill mother that was living with her sister in another town. And they were, a lot of it was gobbledygook and gibberish. A lot of them were notes to the family and things like that. And then they started to get notes, and also to find notes in the mother's room and under the bed and under the furniture. And they were all written in the mother's handwriting. And many of the notes had the names of their relatives and neighbors and friends, some of them living, some of them dead, with dates that they were going to die or had died and things that were going to happen to them. So these were letters that were falling out of thin air, and they were scrawled. It looked like in the mother's handwriting or in the son's handwriting. After weeks went by, they started, just like in the Bell case, to hear this whispering that got louder and louder. And finally, it spoke very clearly, this disembodied voice, and it was the voice of the mother. And the mother started to the voice of the mother started to talk to the mother and to the son, sometimes together, sometimes separately. And then as time went by, there were other voices that would appear. There were in particular the voice of these two women who had been the mothers of friends of Howard. So these were two elderly women who had passed away that he knew, and their voices would speak to him. And most of the time they would, tell him things that he should do, like things that he should fix in the house, or places that he should go, or people that he should call, or they would give prognostications of people he knew that were going to die and when they were going to die. And it gets even weirder. There was another entity or voice that called himself Henry Anglin, and that was the name of another neighbor that they had known, who was a very nice man, but the spirit was really mean and evil and would say horrible, nasty, vicious things to them. And the sisters began to warn the father and the son about Henry Anglin, the spirit of Henry Anglin, and said that he was evil and he was going to bring harm to them. And these letters and these voices went on and on and on, just incessantly for months and months and months. It was just insane. And accompanying these voices and these letters were these massive movements of objects in the house. The father and son came home one day, and a dresser from the bedroom was sitting in the middle of the bed. They also found the dining room table up in the attic, and the attic was only accessible by a pull-down ladder. There was no possible way to get this dining room table up into the attic. No way. On one occasion, a few days later, after the furniture moving incident, they came home and found the family dog on the roof of the house. There's no possible way this dog could have gotten on the roof. The disembodied voices of these two women said that the dog had just gotten there. And when the father asked how the dog had gotten there, they said, "You wouldn't understand. We just think about it and it happens." They also woke up the dad the next night and told that these two women's voices woke up the father and said, "You have to get outside because the dog is trying to commit suicide." And the father went out into the backyard and he saw the dirt in the backyard moving around. The dog had dug a hole and put itself in the hole, and somehow all the dirt had gotten back on top of the dog. He went to find the shovel to dig out the dog, and it wasn't in the garage. And the voices of these women told them that they would make the shovel appear next to the tree in front of the house. And he found the shovel there a few minutes later. He dug out the dog from the hole in the backyard, and the dog was almost dead. So these voices of these women told him to go and get a gun or get a knife or hammer and kill the dog and put it out of its misery. And he ended up getting a hammer and killing the dog by bashing its head in to put it out of its misery, because the dog had apparently tried to bury itself alive. And they told him that Henry Anglin's spirit had told the dog to kill itself. These events went on again for months and months and months until Howard contacted, and it was actually over by the time he contacted Hans Holzer, because they had moved. Eventually, Johnny, the mom, came home. She had gotten psychiatric treatment, and apparently the time with her sister had done her well, because when she came home, she was a lot better. But it didn't have an impact on the things that went on in the house. They were still as intense as ever. But by the time she got home, the father and the son had moved out. So she was moving into the new home with them. And you may have seen that on the episode of Holzer Files where they visited the new house, because the reason they visited the new house they moved into was because in 1973, several years after Hans Holzer had visited the family as part of the investigation that he did, the sister, who was not really part of the events, Amy Beard, had written Holzer to say that her brother had come to believe that he was possessed by the devil. This was Andy, the young boy that was at the center of all of this that was going on in 1968, 1969, 1970. She said that she didn't know what to do. He was absolutely convinced that he was possessed by the devil. He was having suicidal thoughts. He said, I can't get rid of this thing. It's been with me for years. It's been tormenting me for years. There was even an instance during all of this stuff going on where there was a note that fell from the air, which prognosticated or prophesied that Andy was going to take his own life because of the torment by these spirits. And as a matter of fact, several years later, Andy committed suicide in that second house where they had moved. The Holzer Files episode is very interesting. I highly recommend that you watch it. In all of these years, 32 years now that I've been a paranormal investigator, investigating thousands of cases all over the world, I have never seen a case like this. The severity of the phenomena, the prolific nature of these letters and the voices, just the evil dimension of it, the sinister dimension of it, the relentless dimension of it, and then this connection to the mental illness, it seems, of the mother. There seems to be so much psychological phenomena involved in this case. And of course, a lot of it seems to be centered around this boy who was a teenager at the time, who could have been a poltergeist agent. But of course, it went so far beyond that, where this child, well into adulthood, was plagued by what he described as, in plain words, the devil tormenting him. And then what eventually happened to him actually taking his own life, which is something that we find happening in a lot of cases of seeming possession, where the demon wants to completely possess the person to the point where the person gives up, essentially, that, and loses hope that they will ever be well or at peace again. So they take their own life to try and release themselves from their misery. And some churches believe that just ends you right up in hell with the devil. I don't know about that, but it's just a horrible situation. At any rate, it's a fascinating story. And the family actually kept all of these letters, and you'll actually see them going through these letters on the episode of the Holzer Files, if you watch that. A very, very sad case, and hopefully we won't see any more of those in the years to come. If you would like to read the full account of The Devil in Texas, it's creepy, man. My ex-husband gave me this book for my birthday when it came out, and I read the story of The Devil in Texas, and it truly haunted me. I had to sleep with the lights on for weeks in a different room because this story it was so chilling. I mean, you don't know the half of it. It's like 50 pages long, and it has all the details of what was in every one of these letters and every one of these notes, and it's just terrifying and chilling. So I think some of this book is on Google Books. That you can purchase the ebook very cheaply. I think it's like $4 or $5 or something, even though the real book is like this fat. It's like 4 inches thick. I think you can buy it very cheaply, and you'll find that story in this book. And that's the great Hans Holzer right there. There's the house. Amazingly, as I said, I have never encountered a case that was so severe as the story of the Devil in Texas. However, excuse me, over the past few years, I was working on a book that came out last fall called Haunts of the White City. And it's a book that I wrote inspired by the many newspaper articles I was finding on online archives from the 19th century about people having encounters with ghosts in the 1800s in Chicago. And it was during that time that I found this incredible story that takes place in a suburb of Chicago, in the southwest suburb of Lemont. It's a little town that's still there today. There was a farm community back at the turn of the century when this story takes place. And it took place on the farm of a farmer named Willman. And you can see a picture here of the farm because a long version of this story appeared in the newspaper of the time when the story broke. And the story broke because there was actually an exorcism attempt that occurred at the house after one of the local priests at St. Alphonsus Church in Lemont was contacted by the family and told about the events that were going on in the house. The priest was called after these events had tormented the family for some time. And the main phenomena in the story, much like in the story of the Devil in Texas, were these mysterious notes that would appear from out of thin air. The first note appeared when the family was sitting around at the dinner table one evening, and a note just fell out of, they said, like from out of the ceiling and landed in the middle of the dining table. And they all looked around at each other, and the mother picked up the note and unfolded it and read it. And it was the threatening note. And it said that they should get out of the house within 10 days or the demon was going to make their life a living hell. It didn't identify itself as a demon, I should say, but they said that it just said, I'm going to make your life a living hell. So they were, of course, flabbergasted and had no idea like how they thought they were hallucinating, you know. These notes continued to come day after day after day, and they seemed to, just like in many of the other cases, there was one of the children that was adopted, and it seemed to target this girl. It said, you know, things like, oh, this girl's a whore, she's this, she's that, you know, it said terrible things about her. And other things began to happen in the house too, where they were hearing scratching noises and banging noises. And then, much like in these other cases, they started to see a black cat on the property that would, you know, they would shoot at it and think that they shot the cat and the body of the cat would disappear. And the locals started to talk about witchcraft, thinking that there was some kind of a curse that was put on the family, and this was a demonic spirit that was inhabiting the farm that had been conjured up by someone and a curse placed on the family. These events went on for some time, and they're really strange things that happen, and visitors to the house, like in the other cases, would experience these events as well. There was a family member that came for Sunday dinner one time, and they were sitting, and he had hung up his hat and his coat, and they were sitting around the living room after dinner talking, and it started to get to be evening, so he got up to leave. And, you know, this was a little farmhouse. It was like the kitchen with the dining table in it, and then right adjoined to that was a little parlor. And so everyone could see everything that was going on in the entire house, and the bedrooms were upstairs. So they'd all been sitting there together. No one had left. No one had come in. He went to put on his hat and coat, and he found that his hat was gone, and they found it out in the yard, all squashed up, and like someone had stepped on it with muddy boots, and it was full of like dead leaves and rotten apples. And his coat, the inside of his coat that had been hanging up in plain sight the whole time, had these handprints, like something smeared their dirty hands down the inside of the coat. And when they looked at it and smelled it, it was butter. And the mom, the farmer's wife, went into the kitchen cupboard where she kept the butter. It was a big tin, not a tin, but you know, like a crock of butter that they would churn. She took the lid off the butter crock, and there was like, it looked like someone had taken their hand and scooped butter, a handful of butter out of the crock. They were so tormented by these letters, they finally got rid of all of the writing implements in the house. And they just had like fountain pens and like graphite pencils at that time, 1901. So they got rid of all the writing implements. And this thing, whatever, this spirit, somehow used the bluing that she would use to do the laundry to write letters with. Had used like a stick. They found like a stick that had the bluing on the end that this spirit or whatever had used to continue to write these notes. She had originally gotten rid of the letters were originally written in ink from the fountain pen with the inkwell that the farmer's wife would keep in the cabinet. And she finally took down the the inkwell, and she put some holy water in it that the priest had given her. And after that, they saw no more notes written with the fountain pen. So, but then it started to write with the graphite pencils and things. So they got rid of everything, but it still continued to find these things. So they got rid of all the paper in the house then. And then one day, the farmer's wife was getting ready for church, for mass. And she went to the closet to get her hat box, to get her hat for church. And there was a huge piece of cardboard that was ripped out of the hat box. And she later was making serving the Sunday dinner, and the piece of the hat box fell down in the middle of the dining room table with a note scrawled on it saying something like, "You just can't stop me," or something like that. So again, like I said, there's finally an exorcism that was attempted. Father Westarp and another priest came, and they tried to get the demon that they believed it was to write its name on a piece of paper. They had left a pencil and a piece of paper inside the house, and they all went outside. And in an exorcism, you have to get the demon to say its name in order to get the demon to leave. So Father Westarp tried to get the demon to write its name on this paper, and it didn't work. The demon had just written some, mocking thing on the paper instead. So all of this information came from one single newspaper article that I found, very long newspaper article. And I found no other mention of the story except for a tiny little paragraph in the newspaper some weeks later that talked about a neighbor claiming that he was responsible for everything that happened at the house, which I find very hard to believe. In almost every one of these cases, you'll find somebody that tries to claim ownership of things that happen in the situation because there's so much attention that's given to it. It's almost like when someone's murdered and all these people come forward claiming to have been the murderer, it's just for the attention. So it's really difficult in these cases because skeptics are very quick to dismiss cases as soon as they hear someone claim that they were responsible for the trickery or whatever, the fraud. But that's almost never the case where it's actually true. So this is a fascinating case that, I wish I could see some of those letters. I don't know if anyone ever saved them, but this was a long time ago now, 120 years ago almost. But a fascinating story that I never heard of in the Chicago area until I was working on this book. I did write a blog about this. I'll send you the link if you're interested in reading it, and also a link to the original news article that's online if you'd like to read that too.